Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Imagine for a second that you are the ultimate architect. You design the universe, from scratch. You write the code for gravity, for light, for time itself. You set this whole massive machine in motion.
Okay.
But then a few billion years down the road, you see something happening that you want to change. Maybe save a planet or, I don't know, help one person win the lottery.
Right.
The question is, can you reach in and stop the gears? Or are the laws you wrote so perfect, so rigid, that even you can't break them?
The ultimate showdown.
It's the how, the unyielding machinery of physics versus the why, the will of a creator. Today, we are unpacking a really dense, fascinating conversation with the late physicist Stephen Hawking to find out if God can truly escape the cage of his own design.
It sounds like a sci-fi premise, doesn't it? But
Yeah.
you've just described one of the oldest and most intense battlegrounds in philosophy and theology.
It really is. And we aren't just speculating today. We are looking at a specific transcript from the Joseph Butler channel, which captures an interview with Stephen Hawking. And let me tell you, this isn't just dry science.
Oh, no.
This is Hawking wading right into the deep end of the God debate.
It is. And what I love about this source is that it doesn't pull any punches. It deals with the conflict between religion and science, not as some kind of cultural war, but as a logical puzzle.
Exactly. So our mission today is to take this transcript and really extract the signal from the noise. We want to understand Hawking's specific logic about God, miracles, and whether the laws of physics are just, friendly suggestions or absolute unbreakable walls.
We're exploring the limits of power, both the power of human reason to understand the universe and the power of a deity to control it.
Let's jump right in. The interviewer sets the stage by bringing up the very end of Hawking's most famous book, A Brief History of Time. And they focus on this one specific, iconic line. I feel like even if you haven't read the book, you've probably seen this quote on a poster or a meme or heard it somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's probably one of the most quoted lines in modern science writing.
Hawking wrote that if we discover a complete theory of the universe, it shouldn't just be for the elite scientists in their ivory towers. It should be understandable to everyone, philosophers, people on the street, you, me.
And then he drops the hammer.
He does. He says, if we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God.
The mind of God. It sends a shiver down your spine, doesn't it?
It does. It really stops you in your tracks. But I have to ask, and I think you're probably wondering this too, is Hawking, a staunch physicist known for his skepticism, suddenly pivoting to theology here? Is he saying, hey everyone, I've found religion?
That's the trap everyone falls into. It's the million-dollar question. But you have to look at the context of what he calls the ultimate triumph of human reason. He isn't talking about a spiritual revelation. He's not talking about a burning bush moment or a voice from the heavens.
He's talking about physics.
Exactly. He is talking about a complete theory of the universe. He's hunting for a unified set of equations that explains everything from the Big Bang to black holes to, the spin of an electron.
So when he says know the mind of God, he's using it as a metaphor.
Precisely. For Hawking, God in this context isn't necessarily a bearded figure on a cloud passing judgment. He's using God as the embodiment of the logic that structures existence.
Okay.
If you can understand the laws of physics perfectly, if you can see the blueprint, then you understand the intent of the design.
That is a really important distinction. He's saying that the how, the mechanics of the universe, is the only real roadmap we have to the why.
And that is a bold claim. It suggests that doing math is a way, maybe the only way, of truly understanding the creator. It elevates science to this almost holy status.
But the interviewer in this source doesn't let him stay in that safe poetic zone. They immediately pivot to a much harder question, a question about authority, about intervention.
Right, because metaphors are safe. But the interviewer wants to know about the actual dynamics of power.
The interviewer asks, do you think that God can intervene in the universe as he wants? Or is God too bound by the laws of science?
This changes the stakes completely. It shifts the conversation from, does a creator exist, to what can a creator actually do? It's a question of sovereignty versus rules.
It's asking, who is actually in charge here? The creator, or the laws the creator made? And Hawking's answer is just classic. He doesn't say yes or no. He throws out a riddle.
He goes straight for the paradox.
He says, the question of whether God is bound by the laws of science is a bit like the question, can God make a stone that is so heavy that he cannot lift it?
The omnipotence paradox. It's a staple of philosophy 101.
I love this analogy because it sounds like a schoolyard riddle,
Right.
But when you actually try to answer it, your brain starts to tie itself in knots. Let's actually walk through this for a second, because I want to make sure we all get the logic trap he's setting up.
Let's break it down. The premise is that God is omnipotent, all-powerful, can do literally anything.
Okay, anything, no limits.
So you challenge this being, create a rock so massive, so heavy, that it is impossible for you to lift it.
All right, scenario A. God creates the rock. It's there. It's unliftable.
Correct. Now God tries to lift it, but he can't, because he successfully made it unliftable.
So there is an action he cannot perform. He cannot lift the rock. Therefore,
He's not all-powerful.
okay, that's a fail state. So let's go to scenario B. God tries to make the rock, but he realizes, wait, if I make this, I won't be able to lift it, and I'm supposed to be able to lift anything. So he fails to make the rock.
Exactly. If he cannot create the rock, then there is a thing he cannot create.
So there's still something he cannot do.
He's not all-powerful.
It's a total trap. No matter which way you answer, you lose the concept of all-powerful.
It creates a logical loop. It proves, at least in Hawking's view, that the very concept of doing anything has internal contradictions. And this is why Hawking brings it up. He isn't doing it just to be cheeky.
He's attacking the very definition of the word God.
He's showing that framing the question this way, asking if God can break logic, is a flaw in our language, not a mystery of the universe. If you define God as able to do the logically impossible, you just end up with nonsense.
So what is his conclusion from that? Does he just say, therefore God is impossible?
Not exactly. He says, quote, I don't think it is very useful to speculate on what God might or might not be able to do.
Not very useful. That is such a scientist thing to say. It's almost dismissive.
It is dismissive of the philosophical arm wrestling. He's saying, look, we can sit here all day and argue about heavy rocks, but that doesn't tell us anything about reality. He wants to move from the hypothetical to the actual.
He wants to see the data. He wants to know what's actually happening out there.
He pivots from speculation to observation, and that is the absolute core of the scientific method.
And this is where the rubber meets the road. Because he says, rather we should examine what he actually does with the universe we live in.
What he actually does. This is the empiricism kicking in. Stop asking what God could do. Look at what God is doing.
And according to Hawking, what is the universe doing?
Well, Hawking looks at the data. He looks at the stars, gravity, the expansion of space, the movement of atoms, and he says, all our observations suggest that it operates according to well-defined laws.
Well-defined laws. That sounds rigid.
It is rigid. I mean, think about it. Gravity doesn't take a personal day.
Right. You don't wake up on a Tuesday and just start floating because the gravitational constant felt like changing.
Thermodynamics doesn't decide to take a break. The universe is consistent. It's predictable. If you drop an apple, it falls. Every single time. It doesn't float up because God felt whimsical.
So if the universe operates on these strict, unbreakable rails, what does that imply about the guy running the train?
It implies that the conductor, if there is one, never ever pulls the emergency lock.
This is a huge point to really soak in. Hawking is looking at the entire history of cosmic observation, billions of years of data, and he is saying, I don't see a single instance of the rules being broken.
And that is a direct challenge to the concept of a miracle, because what is a miracle by definition?
A miracle is an exception. It's walking on water. It's stopping the sun in the sky. It's a moment where the laws of physics are suspended.
Exactly. A violation of natural law. And Hawking's saying, we don't see that. We see incredible things, black holes, supernovas, but they all follow the math. They all follow the rules.
But wait, he doesn't stop there. He says something that I found really surprising. He doesn't just say, there is no God. He says, these laws may have been ordained by God.
Yes. That is a very specific concession, may have been ordained.
So he is leaving the door open.
He's leaving the door open for a specific kind of God. He's acknowledging that the laws had to come from somewhere, potentially. Or at least he's allowing for the possibility that a standard setter exists.
Okay, so let's run with that. Maybe God wrote the code. Let there be gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared.
Right. But then listen to the second half of the sentence in the transcript. This is the punchline.
But it seems that he does not intervene in the universe to break the laws. At least not once he had set the universe going.
That's the core of his argument. Not once he had set the universe going.
This feels like a very specific theological stance. It sounds almost like he's describing a retired engineer.
It is the classic distinction between theism and deism, and it's vital to understanding what Hawking is saying here. This isn't just semantics. It's a completely different way of viewing the divine.
Okay, let's unpack that for anyone who might not be up on their 18th century philosophy. What's the difference here?
So a theist, which is what most religious people today would identify as, believes in a personal God, a God who is active, a God who listens to prayers, who might change the outcome of a surgery, who intervenes.
A God who is a player on the field, someone who steps into the timeline and changes things.
Exactly, but a deist believes in a God who is more like a clockmaker.
The clockmaker.
Imagine a master craftsman. He builds the most intricate, perfect clock. He designs every gear, every spring. He winds it up. He sets the pendulum swinging. And then
He steps back.
he lets it run. He doesn't open the glass and push the hands forward because he wants it to be noon sooner.
Because if he did that, he'd be admitting that his original design wasn't perfect.
Precisely. If the laws are perfect, why would you need to break them? If God is perfect and he ordained the laws, then the laws must be perfect. If he has to intervene to fix something, it implies the original code was insufficient. It implies a mistake.
That is a powerful image. It creates a universe that was perhaps ordained or set going, but is now running on absolute autopilot.
Autopilot is a good word, and Hawking is saying that looking for God in the exceptions, in the miracles, is a dead end, because in his view, there aren't any exceptions. If you want to find God, you have to look at the rules themselves.
This connects right back to the mind of God comment we started with, doesn't it?
It connects perfectly. If God is the laws, or if the laws are the only expression of God, then the only way to know God is to do physics.
That turns the whole religion versus science debate on its head. Usually we see them as enemies. Science trying to disprove God, religion trying to ignore science.
It does. It suggests that the scientist, by studying gravity, is actually studying the ordained will of the Creator. Meanwhile, the person waiting for a miracle is waiting for something the Creator decided long ago never to do.
It's interesting because it feels like Hawking is trying to be respectful of the concept of God, but simultaneously dismantling the version of God that most people pray to.
I think that's a fair assessment. He isn't attacking the idea of a first cause, not in this text. He is just saying whatever started this, it respects the rules.
It respects the rules.
And that brings us back to the interviewer's question about being bound by laws.
Right, like it's a straitjacket. Like God is sitting there wanting to help, but physics says no.
Exactly. But in Hawking's view, it's not that God is bound by them against his will. It's that the laws are the expression of his will. He doesn't break them because that would be breaking his own nature.
That's a fascinating pivot. It removes the conflict. It's not God versus physics, it's God as physics.
Or at least God is the author of physics who refuses to write plot holes into the story.
I want to go back to the heavy stone for a second. Hawking calls it not very useful. But isn't there something telling about the fact that he uses it at all?
How so?
Well, he answers a theological question with a logical puzzle. Not with scripture, not with emotion. He answers it with cold, hard logic.
That is the triumph of reason he mentioned earlier. For Hawking, reason is the highest authority, even higher than deity in a way. If a concept like omnipotence is logically incoherent, like the heavy stone, then it cannot exist. Logic dictates reality.
So if logic says a being cannot be all-powerful in a way that contradicts itself, then God has to conform to logic.
Yes. And if observation says the laws of physics are never broken, then God must conform to that observation. Hawking is subjecting God to the scientific method.
That is bold. It's basically demanding that God show his work.
It is incredibly bold. It's essentially saying, I will believe in you, but only if you fit within my data set.
And the data set says, no interventions.
No interventions. Not once he had set the universe going.
I wonder how that sits with you, listening today. Because let's be honest, we all have that moment where we want the intervention. We want the car to stop. We want the test results to change.
Of course. It's human nature to want the exception. We want to believe the universe has a soft spot for us.
But Hawking is saying the universe doesn't play favorites.
The universe is an equal opportunity enforcer of laws. Gravity pulls on the saint and the sinner the exact same way.
That is both terrifying and comforting.
It's comforting in its consistency. You know the sun will rise. You can build a civilization on that reliability.
True. But it's terrifying because it means you're on your own in terms of outcomes. You can't appeal to the manager.
The manager has set the store hours and locked the door.
Let's circle back to the opening hook. The conflict between the omnipotent deity and the rigid laws. the how versus the why.
We started by asking if the creator can break the rules.
And Hawking's answer seems to be, it doesn't matter if he can, the evidence shows he doesn't.
Right. The why, the mind of God, seems to be content with letting the how run the show.
It's a synthesis. The interviewer wanted to separate them, to discuss the why rather than the how.
But Hawking brings them back together. You can't get to the why without mastering the how. You can't know the mind of God until you have that complete theory of the universe.
So for Hawking, the ultimate spiritual quest isn't prayer, it's physics.
It's the ultimate triumph of human reason.
It really puts a new spin on the idea of a religious experience. Staring into a telescope or scribbling an equation becomes an act of communion with the Creator.
If the laws are ordained by God, then studying them is the highest form of worship. It's paying attention to the details of the masterpiece.
That is a beautiful thought. Science isn't about killing God. It's about reading his diary.
Reading his diary. I like that. But remember, the diary is written in math.
Always that.
And it seems the diary has no erasures, no crossed out lines. It was written once, perfectly, and that is what we are living in.
So to summarize where we have been today, we started with a rock so heavy God can't lift it.
A logical paradox showing the limits of our concepts of power.
We moved to the observation that the universe has well-defined, unbreakable laws.
The evidence of order allowing for no exceptions.
We discussed that while God may have ordained these laws, he doesn't break them. The clock is wound, and it just ticks on its own.
The non-interventionist universe. The deist framework.
And finally, we landed on the idea that knowing these laws, understanding the how, is the only real way to touch the why.
The mind of God revealed through the triumph of reason.
It's a lot to process. It definitely changes how you look at the world when you walk outside. You don't just see trees and cars. You see a set of rules that have been running perfectly since the beginning of time.
And you realize that you are part of that system. You're not an exception to it. You are made of the same atoms, obeying the same laws.
Which is humbling.
Extremely.
So here's a final thought for you to carry with you today. We talked a lot about the mind of God being a metaphor for the laws of physics. But turn that around for a second. If knowing the mind of God simply means understanding the laws of physics, does that mean science is actually a form of theology? Or does it mean that God is just a metaphor we use because we are too scared to admit that the universe is just math?
That is the question.
Thanks for thinking deeper with us.
See you next time.